This incident happened in the year 1998. 5 months pregnant and feeling hungry constantly, I could not decline Mary's offer to dinner. I looked at my wristwatch as I pushed the elevator button. It was 6:30 p.m. Gosh, I hope I'm not late, I uttered under my breath. Then the elevator doors opened. I walked in and I pressed the 9 button. As the elevator made its way up, I could hear the cracking and cockling that you would normally not hear in a crowded elevator. It was already long after the regular office hours. When the elevator doors slid open, I peered out into the dark corridor to see if I was at the right level. The elevator indicator lights were out of order, so I had no idea what level I was on. I was relieved when I saw Mary's office at the end of the dimly lit corridor. I stepped out of the elevator and began to walk. As I walked, my shadows covered by the few working ceiling lamps shortened and lengthened against the floor and walls. It made me nervous. I turned to look over my shoulder to see if there was anyone behind me, but there was no one else around. I couldn't explain why I felt so nervous. Though her fully glassed walled office, I saw Mary typing away on her computer keyboard. She had not noticed me, so I opened the door and peered in. Mary looked up and smiled. I saw that Mary was a little surprised. I wondered why she should be. She knew I was coming. When I stepped in and let the glass door close behind me, Mary frowned and stared at me as though I had done something wrong. "What's the matter, Mary?" I asked, concerned. "Who's that with you?" Mary pointed to the corridor outside. Puzzled, I turned to look where she was pointing at. I saw no one. "There's no one there, Mary," I said, beginning to feel rather spooked. "I came alone." Mary frowned even more and said, "There's a man outside the door. He was behind you, but you closed the door before he could enter. Why?" I stood there, dumbfounded, and stared at her in disbelief. I didn't say a word. "He is wearing a white polo shirt," Mary added, her face turning slightly pale. Goosebumps began to sprout all over my back, arms, and neck. I felt panic on the way in my head. Weird notions started to spin. What if someone or something wanted to harm us? Just two girls in an office building that's supposed to have been closed for the day? Gosh, what do we do? Part of me wanted to scream, but the other kept me mummed. Then when I saw Mary staring out of the glass wall behind me with her face turning paler every second, I lost my composure. "Mary, what did you see?" Lips trembling, Mary quivered a few words softly. "A man, he's medium built and wearing a white polo t-shirt. Turn around, he's right outside." Mary was almost in tears. I didn't dare turn around. Instead, I went close to Mary and held her by the shoulders. "What is he doing?" I asked. "I can't see him anymore. I think he went away," Mary said in a whisper. I'm very sure I was alone that night when I walked through the corridor. I remember looking behind me at the corridor before entering Mary's office. There was no one behind me. Of course, Mary and I didn't go out of the office alone after the scary incident. We called the security guard and asked him to escort us down. Till today, when I think of the incident, I get goosebumps. In fact, I've got goosebumps right now as I type this story. When Mary told her colleagues about our experience, her colleagues said that they had heard of others had a similar experience to ours. A lot of people were saying that the building was haunted. Fortunately, though, the building burnt down some years ago, and it had been demolished. This story happened when my dad was in college, and back then there weren't a lot of houses. Most of the roads were made up of dirt, streetlights didn't exist, and in some places the native culture was still very strong. This was told to me by my uncle since he witnessed part of it, but I had to get my dad to tell me how the story began, so I'll tell you as how it was told to me by my dad first. During this time, my dad was a very active student council member in his school, and would leave school really late up to the point that he would be the one closing the school. As my dad was closing up the school, he heard the cry of a bird, and he knew what it was and what it meant. It was the bird of the dead, and he knew that if its cries were loud, it would mean that it's far away from you, and if it was soft, it means it's close to you. And at this point, it was getting softer and softer. This bird haunted my dad growing up, so he knew that if he heard it, the dead weren't far off. He dropped everything and didn't bother closing the gate properly and left the school immediately and ran to the street. As he reached the street and was about to cross it, he saw a car pass by, and he felt really ominous about it since it was a hearse. The weird part was, it had a dim glowing red light on the underside and inside of it, like it had neon on it, but it was moving really slow, and it proceeded with no sound at all as it passed him. Soon after, he heard a loud rustling, and saw something that made a chill run up his spine and raised the hair on the back of his neck. He saw a tree's leaves spreading from the top, like someone was spreading them evenly to the side from the middle, and it was only that tree. There was no wind. He said he panicked when he started to see big hands doing it, and this was a big tree, so he ran as fast as he could, and at this point the bird's cry was getting softer and almost gone. As he reached their suburb, he looked back thinking they would be safe, but he was wrong. He couldn't hear the bird anymore, but he could see dead people following him and calling out his name, so he ran as fast as he could until he reached their house. This is the part that my uncle told me, as my dad said he doesn't remember the rest. When my dad reached their house and opened the door to the living room, all the family members that were present at the time jumped back in fear. They said it wasn't my dad that made them jump back, but what they saw behind him. They couldn't see its head from the door, but he was a giant, and it gave off a menacing aura. When my dad entered the living room, they said that he looked like he was almost dead. His skin was pale and his hair was all over the place like he got electrocuted. They got him to lie down and placed a rosary around his neck. Then the family started praying for him to keep him from harm. My uncle said that they could hear people outside calling out my dad's name, and they were telling them to let him out. My dad wanted to go out, so my uncles and aunts forced him down, but he was so strong that he almost overwhelmed them. My grandma was there when it happened, and she told them all what to do. Now, my grandma was a very spiritual person and was very well versed when it came to spirits. She went to the kitchen and took salt and made holy water. Then she went outside and threw salt and holy water at the spirits that were calling for my dad and told them to leave him alone. My uncle said that the spirits left that night with a cry and my dad was returning to normal, but they still prayed for him until morning and my grandma kept watch until then. After this, my dad wouldn't stay at school late anymore and he doesn't stay alone at night. My mom and dad weren't dating when this happened, but my mom said that when they were dating, she would also hear the bird, and my dad would always say that they're there again, and would freak my mom out since she believes in this as well. My dad told me a lot of stories of his experiences growing up, but this was the one he was reluctant to tell me. I know the story seemed a bit far-fetched, and when I heard it, I couldn't believe it either, so I tried to investigate if it was true. So I asked around my family about it during a reunion, and I found that all the people that were there said the same story just as my uncle told me. So when I was barely 20 years old, I was traveling with a small group of people through China, and we were spending about 2 months in Qinghai Province, which used to be a part of Tibet. Our destination was a specific town to teach English, but we'd been stopping often in towns and small cities along the way. One day we arrived in a rural town, very small, nothing unusual. We spent only a couple of days there shopping for food at the markets and walking around to see the sights. Although there weren't many, this was in the dead of winter in February, and all the grass on the hills and plains around the town was dead and brown. The overall feeling was that of the normal kind of bleakness that any rural place in the winter. At this time in my life, things were going amazingly, extraordinarily well for me, and I say that because my teenagehood had been a rather darkly overcast, but the overwhelming feeling of good luck, being able to travel, and these close friends I'd made in the last year had more than changed my feelings and attitude towards life. It was like I was a whole new person. I was ecstatic to be in Tibet and went to sleep with a smile on my face every night. On our second day staying in this small town, I woke up feeling a little odd. Not bad, just odd. Like my normal thoughts and feelings had been turned down low, like on a dial. We all decided to go for a walk on the hills right behind the town, where there was a small summit with a pile of rocks and some prayer flags. As we hiked up the hills behind the town, I started feeling stranger and stranger. I wasn't scared and I didn't feel angry or any strong emotion. In fact, it was like my emotions were trickling out of me somehow. I was getting blanker and blanker, emptier and emptier. My mind started feeling a little hazy, and more, I felt like I simply didn't care about anything. A small and rapidly dwindling part of myself started to panic, knew that something bad was happening, but it was like my own inner voice was slowly getting quieter and quieter. I remember we reached the little summit, and I simply sank to the ground next to the pile of rocks. Without meaning to, I started tuning out the voices around me and fixed all my attention on the little pebbles in the dirt. I began tapping one against the other, rapidly. Do you know the kind of horror that is the opposite of feeling scared or feeling anything at all? The kind of vacuous hideousness of a fly buzzing against a closed window for hours on end in an empty room? That's what was filling my mind. It was demonic in its meaninglessness. I touched my face and I felt that I was grinning at nothing. Through all the emptiness, a thought floated to the forefront of my mind.
You should just die.
At first it sounded totally reasonable, but something in me fought it, and I was momentarily troubled. Right then, my group started to walk down from the hill, and I followed. The further we walked, the more normal I felt, until we left the town that afternoon, and I was totally freaked out when another girl, Hannah, mentioned that she had felt very strange and depressed while staying there. I told her that I had felt the same. When the group leader mentioned that a local had told him that the town had been plagued with a rash of young women under 25 committing suicide, Hannah and I went white. I'm an Australian, and I encountered this ghost while traveling from Hat Yai to Bangkok. I boarded the express train at Hat Yai train station. The journey was to be an overnight one. I would arrive in Bangkok sometime noon the next day. I had a sleeper ticket, which meant my seat would be unfolded into a bed at night. That would only be around 8 p.m. Before that, I had to endure sitting through a long, horrendous 6-hour journey on the slightly padded seats. It was a hot day, and the train was slow. It stopped every half hour or so at small town stations where more passengers and food vendors would come on board. It was good in a way. I could have a snack or two. The seat in front of me was vacant, and an old woman was pushing her way through the narrow aisle towards it. She was struggling with her luggage, so, being the nice guy that I am, I gave her a helping hand. I was amazed that her luggage was very heavy, too heavy for someone her age to manage, but somehow she did it. She sat in front of me but avoided eye contact. I didn't really expect a thank you. Anyway, so I went about reading my book. Once in a while I would sense her stealing glances at me. Every time I looked at her, she avoided my eyes. I assumed it was normal for Thais to feel shy towards Caucasians. I also had doubts about her understanding English. Things started getting interesting when I had to take a leak. I smiled a courtesy smile at her. As I moved one of her bags aside to make way for my foot, my, was I shocked. She looked young, much younger than a 70-year-old woman I saw just now. She had lost 45 to 50 years in 2 hours. She had become a gorgeous 25-year-old. I swear I was more confused than scared. When I returned back to my seat, I had my eyes on her every other minute because she was so beautiful, and I was amazed at her transformation. I thought I was dreaming. It was difficult to get her to look at me, but once it did happen, we locked eyes. There was a certain depth in her eyes like nothing I know. It's hard to describe. I felt pulled in. I was mesmerized. I must have stared at her for a full minute without taking a breath. My heart was pounding hard and fast, and I sensed she knew that. I remember trying to pull myself away, but it was impossible. I was totally paralyzed. Then she smiled. God, was it sinister. I jerked back, and I was relieved to be freed from her bind. I wanted to get out of there, but my knees were too weak. I was shivering yet perspired like a waterfall under my arms. I just looked down at my book, but my mind was still on her. It was tough, but I managed to evade her eyes all the way. Then it was time for the seats to be unfolded and made into beds. While the train staff worked on the bed, I stood silently beside the lady. I sensed her gazing at me, and it made my knees weak. I truly thought I was going to faint, but luckily, the bed was ready in minutes, and I quickly climbed on the upper deck, closed the curtains, took deep breaths, and laid down. I managed to sleep for a few hours. Then I was awoken by a pressure in my bladder. I pulled the curtains open. To my horror, the old wrinkled face was right there behind the curtains. She looked at me angrily, and then opened her mouth to show me a pair of her sharp fangs behind her upper lips. I shrieked like a little girl and wet myself uncontrollably. In fright, I had pulled the curtains close. Some of the other passengers were awoken by my scream, and I had started a commotion. I was too afraid and embarrassed to come out, seeing nothing amiss. They all went back to sleep again. I didn't sleep or went out to dry myself. That's how scared I was. On first light, I peeped out, and to my relief, she was not there. I grabbed my stuff and fled to another cabin and stayed there, standing until Bangkok station. It was a horrible experience I never want to go through again. I am a 30-something single mom of 2 great kids, and we live in New England, and this is my ghost story. In April of 2014, I was briefly hospitalized somewhere I had never been to before. It was a small hospital, only 3 floors, and for the first few days, things seemed normal. The staff was nice, but there were all sorts of bleak and dismal, and although it was well lit, the whole unit had a strange darkness to it, and a heaviness. A few nurses even commented on how they weren't used to patients like me, patients with little life in them still. Every other patient was old and frail. A few days in, a new roommate was brought in. She was elderly and she was terminally ill. We never spoke because she was always completely out of it, but then something odd happened. In the early morning hours of the day, I was to be discharged at around 3 o'clock. I was awakened by a voice in my room. It was a woman's voice, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. I opened my eyes, but there was no one in the room, just me and my roommate, who was incoherent the entire time we shared our room. Assuming it was a nurse in the hall, I tried falling back asleep. Suddenly, there was a loud, frantic voice shouting, "No, no, you can't take me, I won't go." I opened my eyes again, and the room was much darker, and my roommate was sitting straight up in her bed, screaming with a complete utter conviction towards the foot of her bed, almost like a child objecting to bedtime. She was crying and still sitting up straight, looking at something, listening very intently for what seemed like forever. She began to whisper yes and no between whimpers, and then she laid back down, and I watched the darkness leave the room. I really didn't think much of it. After all, I was in a hospital and I was heavily medicated, and it was 3 a.m. The next day, around 12 o'clock, I was in my room, showered, packed, and ready to go. The nurses were still doing my discharge paperwork, so I was having lunch and watching TV. Rearing to get out of there, my neighbor had her daughter there, and she wasn't looking too good. I really wasn't paying much mind when the daughter ran out of the room and grabbed a nurse. The nurse came in and called for the doctor. Things were getting exciting, so I got up and closed the curtain. I'm ashamed to admit this, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. Suddenly, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I started to feel extremely lightheaded and dizzy, and I began sweating profusely. My ears were ringing so loudly that I couldn't hear any of the noise going on around me, and I felt as though I was going to vomit. It was so sudden and so severe. For that moment I thought I was dying. For fear of embarrassment by vomiting, I ran out of the room to the shower room and stayed there until I felt better. When I was able to stand, I walked back towards my room, but the door was closed. The nurse said she'd get me my things and then I could leave, so I did. I didn't know what happened, and quite honestly, I didn't care. I just wanted to go home, so I never bothered asking what happened to my roommate before leaving. 2 days later, I saw her obituary. She did die. And then, that's when everything clicked in my head. The Grim Reaper was in my room, and he took my roommate. Hey guys, thank you all for watching. I'm so sorry this video took forever to get out there. Life, as always, and as unpredictable as it is, always tends to get in the way. But if you did make it this far and you do like this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content. And if you guys have any suggestions down below, write them down in the comments and I will do them. I promise you that much. And if you have a scary story that you wish to share with me so that I can narrate for you guys, my email is right there. And as always, guys, thank you all for watching. And remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.